In the 3rd century before Christ, as autumn mists settled over the northern seas, merchant vessels from Massilia ventured beyond the edge of the known world, driven by whispers of a legendary land. What they discovered there would alter the course of history itself. On a remote, windswept island, Abylos, known today as Helgoland, lay scattered the gold of the north, amber. With every tide it washed ashore, hidden in plain sight, unseen, untouched, unclaimed by those who lived there. And yet, as Roman legions pushed ever northward, as Julius Caesar himself crossed the Rhine to face the unknown tribes beyond, a question lingered in the minds of commanders and scholars alike. Who were these people of the northern lands? These bearded warriors, driven by their women's war cries, who seemed to emerge from the very mists of legend itself. Caesar called them Germans, but that simple name would come to encompass a story spanning more than 2,000 years. From those first tentative encounters on fog-shrouded islands to the great campaigns of Frederick the Great in 1740. A story of peoples who would one day shake the very foundations of the Roman world and ultimately reshape the destiny of Europe itself. In the bogs of Schleswig-Holstein, archaeologists have uncovered 2 giant oak figures, ancient gods carved 25 centuries ago, their broken clay offerings still scattered at their feet. The faith of these early Germans remains shrouded in mystery, but their legacy would echo through the ages. This is their story. In the dying years of the Republic, Caesar had gazed across the Rhine and chosen restraint. But Augustus, first of the emperors, harbored grander ambitions. Roman legions would not merely hold the river, they would cross it, conquer it, and forge a new province from the Germanic wilderness beyond. The plan was audacious: push the frontier to the distant Elbe, transforming the scattered tribes of Germania into Roman subjects. For a time, it seemed to work. Roman discipline took root among the Germanic peoples, yet as one chronicler ominously noted, they had not forgotten their freedom. Autumn 9 AD. Through the mist-shrouded forests of Germania, 3 Roman legions marched toward their winter quarters. 15,000 men, veterans of the 17th, 18th, and 19th legions, followed their commander Publius Quinctilius Varus into what they believed was pacified territory. They were walking into the most devastating ambush in Roman history. From the thickets came the war cries, Germanic warriors led by Arminius, once Rome's ally, now its nemesis, struck with calculated fury. In the mud and chaos of the forest floor, Rome's finest fell by the thousands. Among the dead lay Marcus Caelius, senior centurion of the 18th Legion, his decades of experience counting for nothing against Germanic steel. 3 elite legions, wiped from existence by warriors Rome had dismissed as primitive barbarians. The shock reverberated through the empire. Varus and his surviving officers, grasping the magnitude of their catastrophe, chose the Roman way: death before dishonor. Their suicides marked more than personal tragedy. They signaled the end of Augustus's Germanic dream. The disaster forced a fundamental shift in Roman strategy. No longer would legions push deep into Germania's heart. Instead, Rome would build the most sophisticated frontier system the world had ever seen. From the North Sea to the Danube, a chain of fortresses rose: Xanten, Cologne, Mainz, Strasbourg. The Limes, 548 kilometers of walls, ditches, and watchtowers, became Rome's answer to Germanic resistance. Every few hundred meters, stone towers pierced the skyline, their signal fires ready to flash warnings across the frontier. At Chillout, 500 soldiers maintained this barrier between civilization and chaos. These weren't mere guards. They were engineers, craftsmen, and builders. Each unit stamped its mark on roof tiles, competing for the finest workmanship. Beyond the walls lay heated baths, a reminder that even on the edge of empire, Romans demanded their comforts. The frontier became a membrane, permeable but persistent. Roman merchants traded iron and wine for Germanic amber and furs. Germanic smiths learned Roman metallurgy, forging lance points that could pierce Roman mail. Yet deeper cultural exchange remained limited. The Germans showed little interest in Roman writing or law, preferring their own ancient ways. Tacitus, writing from the safety of Rome, described a world alien to Mediterranean sensibilities. No cities rose beyond the Rhine, only scattered homesteads surrounded by rough fences. In sacred groves, the goddess Nerthus received her worship, a cloth-draped wagon drawn by cattle, followed by celebration and ritual drowning in hidden lakes. Modern archaeology confirms these accounts. Bog bodies and cult wagons emerge from Danish peat, testament to rituals that bound Germanic society together through blood and sacrifice. For the Germanic peoples, community meant survival. To leave the clan was to court death by starvation, exposure, or the swords of enemies. This fierce loyalty, this willingness to die rather than submit, had shattered Rome's greatest ambitions in the Teutoburg Forest. The Rhine would remain Rome's frontier for 4 centuries more. Beyond it lay a world that had tasted Roman discipline, but never forgotten the price of freedom. The sacred order of the Germanic world. Beyond the Rhine, power flowed not from distant capitals, but from the hearth itself. The household stood as the fundamental unit of Germanic society, sacred, inviolable, and divinely ordained. Here, no emperor's decree could penetrate. The head of each family ruled absolutely within his domain, yet could not extend that authority beyond his threshold. This was a world bound by blood and obligation. Extended family offered the only protection against a hostile world, their bonds strengthened by oral traditions that would endure until the 16th century. Some fathers, driven by desperation, even sold wives and children into Roman slavery. Yet the household's integrity remained sacred. Above the householders stood nobles, and above them, kings. But Germanic kingship bore little resemblance to Roman imperial power. Archaeologists have uncovered the oldest known Germanic crown, 1,800 years old, and carrying no political authority whatsoever. What set a king apart was something far more mysterious. Heil, divine favor that allowed him to understand the speech of birds and horses. This magical connection to the gods marked true rulership, a belief that would echo through medieval Europe. Life around 200 AD was a constant struggle against hunger and death. Exhausted soil, dying livestock, and violent storms threatened each harvest. In their sacred groves, Germanic peoples scattered the first grain of each season, calling upon Woden and Donar to secure the year ahead. The gods dwelt everywhere, in trees, streams, and stones. When tribes gathered at their assembly sites, the things, spirits were believed to sit in the branches of great sacred trees, whispering guidance to kings who knew how to listen. Meanwhile, in the capital of the world, 2 centuries after Christ's birth, Romans flocked to ever grander entertainments. Canvas awnings stretched across the Colosseum, shielding spectators as Germanic bears tore apart African lions below. The arena flooded for mock naval battles, crimson water carrying the defeated past horrified crowds. This was the fruit of empire. 700,000 citizens across 432 districts, served by over 1,000 fountains, drawing 700,000 cubic meters of mountain water daily. 11 vast bath complexes hosted 20,000 visitors at once. The Circus Maximus, seating 250,000, witnessed both triumph and tragedy. On one terrible day, its wooden stands collapsed, killing 13,000 spectators. Rome had become a magnet for the world's peoples, Eastern captives, Greek merchants, Germanic slaves, Egyptian scholars. They brought their gods with them, mysterious deities like Abraxas and Anath, their cults blending into the empire's spiritual marketplace. Into this mystical chaos pressed a new religion. In tunnels carved beyond the city walls, Christians buried their dead in catacombs stretching over 100 kilometers, nearly 500,000 graves bearing simple names and dates. For the poor, burial was free, a rare mercy in imperial Rome. These believers called each other brother, seeing in Jesus of Nazareth a new Moses wielding divine power. Money and status meant nothing. Only personal relationship with God opened the path to salvation. Fish and loaf symbols carved on catacomb walls would soon spread across the empire as emblems of this revolutionary faith. When Constantine seized power, he still honored Apollo, the sun god. But as Christianity gained influence among Rome's elite, the emperor granted the new faith imperial favor. Grateful Christians declared him ruler by God's grace, forging a bond between empire and church that would shape Western civilization for centuries. The church grew wealthy and powerful, modeling its organization on Roman administration. Santa Sabina's Basilica, still standing today, borrowed the design of market halls and throne rooms, broad naves flanked by aisles, all supported on columns. By the late 4th century, pagan rituals faced the death penalty. The universal empire demanded a universal faith. Even at the empire's edge, Roman culture flourished. Trier, once a modest settlement on the Moselle, became the largest city north of the Alps. Its imperial palace boasted walls 9 feet thick and underfloor heating that warmed vast audience chambers. Adjoining thermal baths offered daily luxury to officials and guests, so solidly built that during World War I, their walls still sheltered captured officers. But the disciplined republic had given way to corrupt aristocracy. As emperors indulged in extravagance, the Huns swept westward from Central Asia, driving Germanic tribes before them like leaves before a storm. In January 407, the Vandals reached Trier. Though among the West's best fortified cities, its court had already fled. Guards abandoned the northern gate, and terrified citizens sought refuge in the amphitheater. The invaders looted the city, but left the amphitheater intact. A final irony. Trier's collapse mirrored events across Gaul. Theaters fell silent, Mainz lay in ruins, Cologne swarmed with enemy bands. When King Alaric's Visigoths cut Rome's supply lines in 408, corpses piled behind the walls as famine took hold. Despite surrendering vast treasures, gold, silver, silk, and spices, Rome could not hold out. On August 24, 410, the Eternal City opened its gates. Political authority collapsed, but the Church and Roman culture endured. the New World. From the bones of tens of thousands of migration period peoples, archaeologists read the story of these turbulent centuries. Young warriors consumed vast amounts of meat but often lost their teeth by adulthood, surviving on porridge. Life expectancy rarely exceeded 30 years. Even minor wounds proved fatal. Between the 4th and 7th centuries, waves of tribes surged across Europe, toppling old orders and creating widespread chaos. Yet from this turmoil emerged the foundations of medieval European culture, the Western world as we know it. Between the 4th and 7th centuries, waves of tribes surged across Europe, toppling old orders and creating widespread chaos. Yet from this turmoil emerged the foundations of medieval European culture, the Western world as we know it. The Lombards, originating in Scandinavia, exemplified this transformation. After centuries on the lower Elbe, they migrated to Hungary, then marveled at Constantinople's Hagia Sophia, before turning toward Italy. Meeting little resistance, they settled most of the peninsula by the mid-6th century, ready to threaten Rome itself. In their sacred groves, these peoples sacrificed cattle, horses, deer, and sometimes humans, believing these offerings secured divine favor amid constant upheaval. The old world was dying. A new one struggled to be born. The Great Migration, birth of a new world. Between the 4th and 7th centuries, Europe convulsed in an age of iron and blood. Masses of people surged from the north and east, recognizing no borders, acknowledging no authority save their own desperate hunger for survival. They flooded every land, leaving behind only prayerful remnants amid total devastation. To live in this time was to wage constant war. Entire peoples vanished from history, old orders collapsed into chaos, and communities fell into despair. Yet from this indescribable turmoil, something extraordinary emerged. European culture itself, the foundation of the Western world. Germanic tribes gazed southward with longing. Along every Mediterranean coast lay the Roman Empire, a realm where fertile soil produced abundant harvests and no one went hungry. To the Germans, this was a dreamland of milk and honey, made all the more tempting by Rome's waning military strength. The Goths and Vandals shattered the frontiers and pressed toward their ultimate prize, Rome itself, the glorious capital with its gold-covered palaces. On the Forum Romanum, barbarian warriors celebrated their spoils, while new waves of invaders poured in, looted richly, and vanished. Only the Lombards managed to establish lasting control. Their journey began in the mists of Scandinavian prehistory. Over centuries, the Lombards migrated south to the European mainland, appearing at the lower Elbe around Christ's birth. For 400 years they lived as farmers, surviving on porridge and bread. Then they moved into Hungary, where milk, butter, and meat transformed them from farmers into proud livestock breeders. In the 6th century, Lombard envoys stood before Constantinople's walls. They considered attacking, but were awed by Hagia Sophia's vast dome, marble walls, and carved columns. Inside, people revered their emperor like a god. Recognizing the city's strength, the envoys turned toward Italy, where weaker prey awaited. The war-weary population offered little resistance. By mid-century, roughly 100,000 Lombards had settled most of the peninsula. Why they spared Rome remains unknown, but they kept their swords ready. This was a world where only brave warriors gained entry to Valhalla. When locals knelt in churches begging God for mercy, the conquerors laughed and mocked their prayers. Rather than defend their walls, leaders clung to mosaics of saints, a sight the Lombards found pitiful. The Hildebrand song, the oldest heroic epic in a Germanic language, captures this warrior ethos. An old fighter named Hildebrand returned to northern Italy after 30 years to find only his son Hadubrand alive. Mistaking his father for an impostor, Hadubrand accused the stranger of cowardice. To prove his identity, Hildebrand raised his sword against his own child. "If fate wills it," he cried, "my only child may strike me with his blade, or I him." They fought fiercely until the story abruptly ends. No one knows who fell first. The Frankish Revolution. Meanwhile, the Franks swept across former Roman Gaul, conquering half of Europe through plunder and violence. When King Clovis defeated the last Roman governor, he made a calculated decision. He knelt before a Catholic bishop to be baptized. By adopting the conquered people's faith, Clovis secured the church's knowledge, skill, and influence. In Albenga, a small baptistery still marks where Clovis and 3,000 veterans entered the sacred waters together. The Frankish elite converted as one, bringing the church under their realm's authority. Yet, in their hearts, the Franks remained pagans. Christian princes refused to enter their graves without weapons. Their tombstones bore magical symbols alongside crosses, proof that Christian teaching alone had not convinced them. Primeval forests covered Central Europe in Frankish times. Paths wound through dense woods where travelers lost themselves among bear-haunted caves and wolf-prowled thickets. Yet the forest also provided nuts, herbs, roots, mushrooms, and honey from wild bees. People believed in nature's unseen powers. Pregnant women wore bear claws for strong children. Felling a linden tree required asking forgiveness first. Frequent spider webs warned of disease. Nature spoke only in signs and wonders. Nearly everyone lived in the countryside, clearing forests for settlements. The king held the largest estates, granting them as fiefs to nobles who parceled land to farmers in exchange for harvest shares. This system of obligations would endure for centuries. Into this world came Boniface, an English monk determined to drive out superstition and bring Christian reason. He scorned local clergy, who blessed pagan sacrifices before eating the meat, and deacons who kept concubines. The Pope commissioned Boniface to reform the church throughout Frankish lands. He traveled the Danube, reviving old dioceses and founding new ones. On a former Roman cemetery near Augsburg, his first small church rose in the 8th century. Boniface died in 754, but his churches still stand. That same year, King Pepin journeyed to Rome seeking the Pope's blessing. As a noble without divine kin power, Haile, his rule lacked legitimacy. Pepin offered the Pope conquered lands between Rome and Ravenna, creating the Papal States. In return, the Pope anointed him king, bestowing Christian Haile. From that day forward, every ruler would claim to reign by the grace of God. Pepin passed this sacred kingship to his son Charles. The young king proved himself formidable, campaigning from the Atlantic to the Pyrenees, conquering the Lombard kingdom, absorbing Bavaria, and weaving Slavic regions into his growing realm. Of all his foes, the Saxons along the lower Elbe resisted most fiercely. After 30 years of relentless fighting, Charles subdued them with overwhelming force, compelling baptism and tribute while allowing them to keep their tribal laws. Charles spent half his life on horseback, leading armies that conquered half of Europe. Every May, he summoned thousands of foot soldiers and hundreds of heavily armored cavalry, elite warriors whose horses and armor cost as much as 20 cows each. Determined to foster learning and art, Charles built his grand palace at Aachen. Its massive bronze doors and lion-headed handles awed all of Europe. The palace church still stands as a symbol of his power. Aachen became a center of scholarship. Renowned teachers instructed the realm's clergy in reading, writing, and preaching by royal decree. To replace chaotic Frankish script, Charles revived classical Roman letters and pure Latin. Monasteries followed new models, self-contained communities with churches, living quarters, gardens, workshops, and schools enclosed like small towns. Yet even abbots heeded the king's call to war, trading cassocks for armor when Charles marched against his enemies. From the chaos of migration had emerged a new order, Christian, Frankish, and destined to reshape the world. At the height of his power, Charles ruled over half of Europe. His court proclaimed him head of all Christians, and on Christmas Day in the year 800, the Pope crowned him emperor in Rome. Charles issued a new coin modeled on Constantine's, the profile bearing his own carefully groomed Germanic mustache, a barbarian king claiming the mantle of Rome. Yet like a true Germanic chieftain, Charles decreed that upon his death the empire be divided among his sons. When he died on January 28, 814, his realm fractured as new waves of invaders engulfed Europe. Chroniclers lamented, Romans, Franks, and all Christendom are plunged into sorrow. The whole world mourns Emperor Charles. The Viking Storm. In the middle of the Baltic Sea, the island of Gotland held secret riches. From the 9th century onward, its inhabitants traded as far as Baghdad, filling their ships with silks, spices, and gold. Stone ship graves across the island speak to a people whose lives and deaths were shaped by the sea and by risk. Skilled shipwrights built vessels unmatched in speed and capacity. Landless Norsemen and merchant sons joined raiding bands, and when warriors died, kin raised image stones carved in Roman style but bearing Norse scenes of dragons, warriors, and torches. On Schleswig-Holstein's west coast stand vast earthworks, 9th century forts where villagers huddled in terror. For these were the days when Vikings came, feared warriors who struck like lightning and vanished like smoke. While Charlemagne's realm had once seemed secure, his death left Europe divided into squabbling kingdoms. By the year 880, Central Europe lay defenseless. The Vikings, mobile and ruthless, found a continent ripe for plunder. As merchants and conquerors, they pressed eastward, founding what would become Old Russia. They sailed across the North Sea into the Mediterranean, mistaking Luna in northern Italy for Rome itself before sacking the city. Their raids left the old Frankish heartland a wasteland. Threats arose from the east as well. Along the middle Danube, nomadic Hungarians settled. Their mounted raiders feared as much as the Vikings. They struck deep into Europe, Regensburg, Paris, even Rome, stealing all the riches these lands could offer. In the East Frankish realm, terror drove people into the forests. Desperate, several Germanic tribes formed an alliance and chose a Saxon leader as king, Henry I. With his election in the early 10th century, German history truly began. Saxons, Franks, Bavarians, Swabians, and Thuringians united under a single ruler for the first time in over a millennium. Henry's first task was defending the tribes against Viking and Hungarian raids. He claimed as his talisman the Holy Lance, said to contain a nail from Christ's crucifixion, a sacred relic believed to confer divine favor upon its bearer. Henry scored a decisive victory when he captured a Hungarian leader in the Harz foothills. Securing a truce in exchange for the captive, he bought 9 years of peace, time he used to build a network of frontier castles along the eastern border. From these strongholds, Germanic warriors pushed back invaders and solidified Henry's power. Yet his authority remained largely military. Tribal dukes retained significant autonomy and often resisted royal overreach. Henry's son Otto I inherited both his father's realm and his vision of church-state partnership. Keenly aware of Charlemagne's legacy, Otto summoned the great lords to Aachen and received royal anointing in the palace chapel. Clad in priestly robes, he claimed the throne once held by a Frank, signaling his intent to revive the empire's Christian spirit. Under Otto, the church regained influence and helped consolidate the realm. Bishops issued royal decrees sealed in the king's name, provoking unease among dukes who saw their power threatened. After conquering the old Lombard kingdom, Otto's domain stretched from the Baltic to the Gulf of Taranto. At Gernrode, in the Harz foothills, Margrave Gero defended the northeastern frontier. He infamously invited 30 Slavic princes to a feast and had them slain. Yet even Gero saw church support as vital. He founded a convent whose fortified church still stands as witness. When Hungarian raids resumed, Otto called all princes to arms. In a remarkable display of unity, dukes, counts, and bishops mustered under the king's banner to defend Christendom. 10,000 armored cavalry faced the Hungarian horde. After the first skirmishes, the battle seemed lost. The lines faltered. Then Otto seized the Holy Lance, turned his horse, and stormed the enemy once more. This battle, fought on the Lechfeld near Augsburg in 955 AD, determined the future of the realm. For the first time, Germanic tribal warriors may have felt themselves united as one people. From that day, the Hungarian threat withdrew permanently. News of triumph spread across Europe like wildfire. The German kingship stood at the height of its political power. Otto still looked to Charlemagne as his model. Like the Frankish ruler, he wanted to be crowned emperor in Rome. He crossed the Alps with a great entourage and arrived in the Eternal City in January 962. Rome was a sad sight, ruins of a once great era, cows grazing among crumbling houses. Even the papacy had lost prestige. The popes had turned an ancient Roman mausoleum into a fortress, barricading themselves with mistresses and children when angry Romans revolted over taxes. Otto laughed at the pope, then ordered the head of the Christian church to crown him emperor. The pope obeyed. Otto had brought a crown with him, not merely jewelry, but a message. The crown expressed the idea of Western imperial rule, its language made of stones and pearls arranged according to a deeply considered plan. Only recently have researchers deciphered the hidden meaning of the emeralds, sapphires, and amethysts. They symbolize numbers and represent the city of paradise, the heavenly Jerusalem. On one panel, God sits between 2 angels. Whoever beholds this image is chosen by God, the voice of divine truth. Under these circumstances, there was only one possible interpretation: the emperor himself. On one panel, God sits between two angels. Whoever beholds this image is chosen by God, the voice of divine truth. Under these circumstances, there was only one possible interpretation: the emperor himself. From the ashes of Charlemagne's empire, a new order had emerged, German, Christian, and destined to shape Europe for centuries to come. The Sacred Empire, David's crown. For Otto, King David of the Old Testament served as the model of divine rulership. David, who had founded the great kingdom of Israel. This imagery reminded all who beheld the crown of rule's true purpose: to spread the faith and govern with justice and wisdom, just as King Solomon once had. The imperial crown proclaimed a revolutionary message. This emperor was both supreme secular ruler and highest priest. Concerning the papacy, it said nothing. As emperor and protector of all Christians within his realm, Otto generously endowed the Pope with privileges recorded in official documents. Though the imperial title granted no additional legal power, his prestige soared immeasurably. What count or duke would dare rise against an emperor chosen by God himself? This is why almost every later German king sought the imperial crown. With great retinues, the northern rulers walked across the rubble of ancient Rome. Nearly 1,000 years had passed since that Rome had tried to subdue the Germans. What must Otto's Saxon and Bavarian companions have thought upon seeing the remnants of a long-lost civilization? They saw the Roman world as a product of barbarism, realistic depictions of human beings, goddesses carved from cold stone in shameless nakedness. What primitive culture, paganism at every step. Only Christian art found acceptance at the imperial court. One of the emperor's advisors, Bishop Bernward of Hildesheim, visited the church of Santa Sabina. Spellbound, he gazed up at ancient wooden doors, already 500 years old in his day, and saw reliefs telling stories from Jesus' life in simple but clear imagery. The three wise men approached Mary and the Christ child with gifts in hand, a symbol of Christianity's victory over pagan religions. Christ, performing miracles, pointed his staff at earthen jars, turning water into wine. These images were crafted for believers who could not read, inviting worshippers, walk through this door into the church and partake in the miracles of Jesus. Bishop Bernward had never seen such art. Deeply moved, he returned north to his diocese, determined to make the spiritual world visible in stone. In his monastery church of St. Michael, Bernward turned the millennium's faith into architecture, preserved to this day. From the outside, St. Michael rose like a fortress, its mighty walls commanding a small hill above the city. Money, it was said, was never lacking. Bernward ruled as the wealthiest man for miles in the emperor's name. Whoever entered St. Michael felt surrounded by clear, structured space. As in antiquity, columns separated the central nave from side aisles, offering monks calm and strength. Atop each column were carved names. Inside each block lay relics, bodily remains of saints, perhaps brought by Bernward from Rome. The secret behind St. Michael's harmony lay in its measurements. The holy numbers 3, 5, and 7 governed all proportions, pointing every mind to God and to the bishop's scholarship. In Rome, Bernward had been fascinated by triumphal columns honoring ancient emperors. So he cast a bronze column for St. Michael, its central figure Christ himself, reliefs spiraling upward, just like those on Santa Sabina's doors, telling of the Redeemer's deeds. Just as a Roman emperor sent governors into the provinces, the man from Nazareth with a wave of his hand, sent his apostles into the world. Churchmen like Bernward scoffed at pagan statues, yet they made careful use of Roman imperial symbols. The message was clear. Christian empire had inherited Rome's authority. Everywhere, kings and queens, bishops, abbots, and abbesses competed for the most beautiful, valuable, and ornate works of art. Empress Kunigunda adorned her head with a crown of gold and gemstones. At life's end, she laid that masterpiece of medieval goldsmithing on the altar, offering it to St. Peter. By the 11th century, the boundary between sacred and secular had all but disappeared. Kings commissioned magnificent gospel books from monastic workshops, books that glorified both monarch and realm. At the king's right hand stood clerical advisors, at his left, secular princes. Subjugated lands, portrayed as women, bowed before their ruler. All people and nations were to serve the emperor, and the emperor alone served God. What Constantine began in Rome continued in the German Empire. Saints Peter and Paul held the imperial crown. The emperor stood in the posture of the crucified, his upper body floating in heavenly realms. God himself handed him the crown. A century after Otto's coronation, lavish illuminated manuscripts were created, books later forgotten, until modern scholars deciphered their cryptic texts and crude figures. Resting on altars and accessible only to senior clergy, their gold and ornamentation offered priests a glimpse of the divine. There was no longer a boundary between heaven and earth. The golden letters did not merely contain God's word, they were God's word. Only the great monasteries could produce such gospel manuscripts. Monks spent years cultivating plants for pigments. A single parchment page took one scribe 3 weeks to complete before writing or painting even began. The effort behind this sacred art, offered in honor of church and king, was immense. Each page proclaimed the same revolutionary message. Earthly power and divine authority had merged into one. The German Empire was not merely a political entity, it was the kingdom of God made manifest on earth. From Otto's crown to Bernward's bronze column, from illuminated manuscripts to fortress churches, every artifact proclaimed the same truth. The emperor ruled not by conquest alone, but by divine right. Heaven and earth had become one. By the mid-11th century, Goslar had become a dominant seat of imperial power. Silver discoveries in the Harz Mountains fueled economic growth. Much of that wealth flowed into constructing a palace, later restored in the 19th century with great imagination. Lightning, fire, and war had left their marks. Only the lower stone walls remained intact, standing as silent witnesses to an age when sacred and secular power were inseparable. On July 14th, the attackers pushed their siege towers against the walls, hurled ladders over the battlements, and stormed into the city. An eyewitness later wrote of the fleeing defenders, "Our men pursued them, cutting them down as they fled, until they reached Solomon's temple, where the slaughter ran so deep that our soldiers waded ankle-deep in blood." Survivors dragged the bodies from the streets and piled them into mounds as tall as houses. Then, weeping with a mix of grief and triumph, they went to venerate the tomb of their Savior. At last, the Crusaders had achieved their goal. They knelt before Christ's sepulchre and prayed, certain of heavenly reward. Yet once their prayers were said, they looted the eastern treasure chambers with equal fervor. The First Crusade was followed by 6 more, but Western knights never held Jerusalem permanently. Few veteran crusaders returned home. Among them was Duke Henry the Lion, who in 1172 came back to Germany laden with precious relics for his duchies of Bavaria and Saxony. Henry settled with his English wife in Brunswick, then little more than a village. After his return, however, Brunswick prospered. He built a grand palace complex called Heinrichsburg. Though only fragments of its original stones remain, 19th century reconstructions, guided by early drawings, have revived its soaring halls. The great upper hall, larger than any court chamber in the empire, proclaimed its builder's power and was meant to rival even those of Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. East of the Elbe lived pagan Slavs, recently converted by Christian missionaries, yet Henry launched a crusade, subduing princes, seizing lands, and exacting crushing levies on peasants. A chronicler said the expeditions spoke not of piety, but of profit, and thus eastern settlement of Germans took off. Under Otto the Great in the 10th century, Magdeburg had been the key bulwark. By 1200, Lübeck organized crusades and migration into Slavic lands, and towns like Rostock, Stralsund, Greifswald, Stettin, Elbing, and Breslau sprang up east of the Oder and Vistula. In Lübeck, Henry erected a round tower at the old city gate. Its massive lower stones dated to his time, while upper levels rose later. Proven in the east, round towers projected from city walls, allowing defenders to fire in all directions, a design he studied and brought home, as he did trade. Under his protection, long-distance merchants from Westphalia and Saxony sailed the Baltic. Lübeck became a gateway. Salt, cloth, and metals traveled via Gotland to Novgorod. Furs and wax sailed back through Kiev to Constantinople, where Italian traders loaded spices and silk for Venice and Genoa. Meanwhile, Frederick I Barbarossa reigned. In Hesse, he built the imperial palace of Gelnhausen, not for defense, but for beauty. Large windows looked vulnerable to siege, yet the castle's purpose was to impress. Elegant arches and richly carved benches framed its great hall to entertain envoys. His greatest challenge lay in Italy, where wealthy city-states like Milan and Venice bristled at imperial taxes. Campaigns to reassert authority found him dependent on German princes, especially Henry the Lion, revealing the realm's fragility. The empire comprised 3 kingdoms: Italy with the Papal States, Burgundy, and Germany, each fractured into duchies, counties, and marches. Henry the Lion, Duke of Saxony and Bavaria, ranked first among princes, making Central Europe a patchwork of competing powers. Above them stood the Church. 6 ecclesiastical provinces in Germany, directed from Rome, held archbishoprics that cut across political borders. Spiritual authority often outmatched secular rule. The largest territory was the Archbishopric of Mainz, spanning from northern Italy across the Elbe and beyond Bohemia into Poland. Cologne and Trier covered somewhat smaller areas, yet their political influence matched Mainz's. From Bremen, missionaries brought the faith north. Magdeburg stood as a bulwark in the east, Salzburg in the south. Archbishops wielded secular authority alongside their spiritual office, making them rivals to dukes and counts. Born into the Swabian Hohenstaufen and elected King of Germany by princes convinced he would uphold their privileges, Frederick proved shrewd and intelligent, precisely the man to restore monarchical authority and end feudal strife. Dirty, bloody feuds dominated the land. To govern effectively, Frederick surrounded himself with jurists, diplomats, and historians trained in logic and law employed notaries to issue written charters sealed with his signet, making agreements legally binding and establishing new certainty in German law. On rocky peaks in the Palatinate forest stood Trifil's castle. Behind its thick walls counts, archbishops, and even King Richard of England were held. For over 150 years, German kings stored the imperial regalia there: orb, cross, crown, symbols that lent a sacred aura. Frederick styled himself Emperor of the Holy Empire. But Henry the Lion had ceased to follow Frederick. The emperor triumphed. Henry was deposed and stripped of his duchy. In Sicily's largest city, Palermo, an 8-year-old boy named Frederick, orphaned and destitute, wandered busy markets and absorbed diverse cultures. By 12, he had secured control of Sicily. At 17, German princes sent a delegation to summon him north. But Henry the Lion had ceased to follow Frederick. The emperor triumphed. Henry was deposed and stripped of his duchy. In Sicily's largest city, Palermo, an 8-year-old boy named Frederick, orphaned and destitute, wandered busy markets and absorbed diverse cultures. By 12, he had secured control of Sicily. At 17, German princes sent a delegation to summon him north. His journey nearly faltered in Rome when he ran out of funds. Pope Innocent III supplied money and troops and issued a papal bull confirming Frederick's crown and the imperial title to drive out Otto IV of Brunswick. Emboldened, Frederick left Rome confident, but Otto's supporters blocked the Alpine passes, setting an ambush. With a loyal few, he slipped through remote valleys and rotting bridges, evaded capture, and emerged into the heart of Germany. At Tarasp, he showed the Pope's documents. The Bishop of Chur welcomed him and granted protection. 3 hours before Otto reached Constance, Frederick entered the city. Its gates closed against Otto while the 17-year-old from Palermo sat at the banquet meant for his rival. Citizens sided instantly with Frederick. News of a penniless boy driving the emperor from his own table spread like wildfire, and Upper Rhine princes switched allegiance. Frederick rewarded spiritual and secular princes with rights sealed in documents. No new castles, cities, tolls, or mints on their lands, and respect for princely jurisdiction, replacing conflict with legal certainty. In 1215, in Aachen's Palatine Chapel of Charlemagne, he was crowned king of the German Empire. Frederick soon set off southward to be crowned emperor after appointing his young son regent. Under his rule, Germany experienced peace and prosperity within the fragmented Holy Roman Empire, though power remained with regional princes and the Pope governed independently. Only in Sicily could Frederick act with full authority. Elsewhere, his imperial supremacy was symbolic, while France and realms in Poland and Hungary were on the rise. In Italy, he built Castel del Monte and created a structured bureaucracy in Sicily. Officials answered directly to the crown. Fortress-like strongholds maintained order and church buildings ceased, showing a shift to statecraft. For 30 years, Frederick experimented, writing a definitive treatise on falconry and compiling antique remedies: plantain, lentil, vinegar, wolfsbane, millet, celandine, white pepper, male fern, bryony, beaver gland, fat, buttercup, for ailments. Frederick ruled for 30 years. Despite papal hatred, the people loved him. A 14th-century Bremen cog, recovered in 1962, testifies to flourishing trade under his stability. The cog became a symbol of the Hanseatic League, whose Baltic and North Sea cities, Lübeck, Hamburg, Danzig, Visby, secured privileges for merchants and fostered commercial culture. In Bergen, Hanseatic merchants at the German bridge controlled cod and haddock trade. A strict contour sheltered over 2,000 men. Visby's wall protected a prosperous entrepot where cogs sailing to Russia or Livonia carried priests, monks, ideas, furs, wax, and other commodities. Lübeck, the queen of the Huns, teemed with cogs unloading copper, wax, hemp, then loading linen, wine, salt. Credit transactions from afar boosting profits and strengthening the mercantile class. In 1317, Heinrich Bocholt, a Lübeck merchant's son, became bishop, signaled erosion of social barriers and rising civic and mercantile influence in church and state. Prosperity was followed by catastrophe. 7 years after Bocholt's death, the Black Death swept across Europe. Arriving in Germany in 1348, the plague killed 1 in 3 within hours. Doctors could do nothing. The dead piled outside walls. Rumors that Jews were to blame led to pogroms. Entire communities were destroyed, and Europe descended into chaos and despair. Faith shifted. Jesus became the suffering Christ. Believers clung to passion images in 1349 as the plague peaked. Only Bohemia along the Vltava remained spared, enjoying peace and prosperity. Its stone bridge and gate tower became a marvel and symbol of wealth. Into this world came Charles of Luxembourg, King of Bohemia, and later Emperor. He undertook the extraordinary mission of stabilizing an empire ravaged by disease, famine, and warfare. In Bohemia, he ruled freely, founding the first university, commissioning a Gothic cathedral, dedicating a chapel to St. Wenceslas, and relying on bishops. Charles hired German builders, especially Peter Parler, who gave Bohemia a radiant face. Charles's marriages secured estates. He expanded peacefully. Purchase of Silesia, Lower Lusatia, Schweidnitz-Jauer, Brandenburg, even Pomerania. Outside Prague, he built Karlstein Castle with thick walls for spiritual renewal. Pilgrims paid to see relics in golden reliquaries. Indulgences and revenues soared. Symbols mattered. He crowned a statue of Charlemagne with his own crown, and in 1356 issued the Golden Bull that fixed election rules. In 1489, Willibald Pirkheimer traveled to Florence and discovered a freer, vibrant world, celebrating Plato, art, and personal worth. In 1495, he returned to Germany, torn by feuds. Old disputes soon set the stage for the Reformation. Emperor Maximilian I could barely rule. Real authority lay with territorial princes. Nuremberg prospered as the imperial crown weakened. Once an outright imperial holding, Nuremberg had won de facto autonomy and grown into a semi-sovereign city of 40,000 souls. Among them lived Bartholomeus Viatis, perhaps Germany's wealthiest man, with over 1 million guilders to his name. Thanks to emperors hopelessly indebted to its merchants, Nuremberg's citizens enjoyed trade privileges unmatched elsewhere in the empire. In 1495, Willibald Pirkheimer returned home from Italy laden with Greek grammars and Roman love poems. His father intended him for the city council, but Pirkheimer, having savored Italy's intellectual freedom, found Nuremberg provincial and its customs stale. Still, he accepted his father's wishes. He married, took office, and joined the council. His new colleagues proved more progressive than they first appeared. Together they drafted a written civil code to to replace centuries of inconsistent oral customary law with clear rules modeled on Roman principles. Heated debates filled the council chamber. Latin-speaking jurists sparred over clauses, and men like Hieronymus Holzschuer, whose family would serve unbroken on the council from 1317 to 1806, helped modernize the city's administration. Meanwhile, in Augsburg, councillors emerging from the town hall stepped into a vibrant marketplace where long-distance merchants completed spice trades. Noblewomen swept by in sleighs, and peasants, craftsmen, and laborers mingled in a scene of divinely ordained harmony. Yet most imperial cities faced the same fate. The expenses of governance, diplomacy, and defense outstripped their revenues, and few patricians trusted scholarly advisors. Pirkheimer, however, proved an exception. His cosmopolitan erudition earned Nuremberg prestige until he translated ancient texts deemed immoral. Forced to resign, he began living on his own terms and struck up a famous correspondence with Erasmus of Rotterdam. They debated the essence of true Christianity. Erasmus had abandoned convoluted scholasticism in favor of ad fontes, a return to the Bible's original Greek and Hebrew texts, and published those sources to reveal gospel truths. Inspired, educated Germans followed suit. They rediscovered the simplicity of Christ's message, learned that Paul was once married, and saw Christianity as clear and human, as vivid as Homer's poetry. Calling themselves humanists, they championed free inquiry and the full development of human potential. In the mid-15th century, Gutenberg's movable type cast this new spirit in metal. By pouring lead antimony bismuth tin alloy into letter molds, he created reusable letters that could be set into pages, inked, and pressed, revolutionizing book production and slashing costs. His 42-line Bible remains famed for its beauty, and from Mainz printing presses spread across Western Europe. In Nuremberg, Anton Koberger ran the largest workshop, 100 printers at 24 presses turning out religious texts, then humanist works in a flood of learning. Alsatian Schlettstadt became a center of classical studies. Beatus Rhenanus donated 670 volumes to his library. In 1494, Johannes Reuchlin argued that Hebrew study was essential to grasp Jewish wisdom, while Johann Pfefferkorn urged burning all Jewish books, an early clash foreshadowing the Reformation's battles over faith, texts, and tolerance. Furious disputes split the German intelligentsia into two camps. On one side stood Reuchlin and his fellow humanists. On the other, the conservative scholastics. Though fought with pen and ink, these battles echoed through every court and university as scholars eagerly shared the latest pamphlets and printed tracts. Reuchlin's incendiary work on Jewish texts even reached Emden in East Frisia, where the original 1500 edition still survives, complete with Erasmus's own marginalia, a testament to how closely European humanists followed one another's writings. While the quarrel over Jewish books never found final resolution, the very fact that it was waged in print demonstrated how deeply humanism and the new technology of movable type had shaken the Church's old intellectual dominion. In Nuremberg, Johannes Müller, better known as Regiomontanus, embodied the humanist spirit. As an astrologer, linguist, mathematician, librarian, and eventually bishop, he built Germany's first observatory right alongside a printing press so that his astronomical discoveries could be published at once. He fashioned instruments, telescopes, astrolabes, compasses, and compiled tables that guided sailors across the globe. Armed with these tools and Ptolemy's rediscovered cosmographia, explorers like Christopher Columbus proved the Earth's sphericity and opened the age of discovery. The revival of Ptolemy owed much to humanists digging through medieval libraries. His 2,000-year-old grid of latitude and longitude, once so arcane that translators despaired, was reissued by Regiomontanus and beautifully edited by Pirkheimer in his last year. The resulting Cosmographia captivated readers. Lay people traced imagined voyages past the Pillars of Hercules, dreamed of strange peoples, and felt the world shrink before their eyes. In 1515, a ship from India limped into Europe, its hold carrying a chained rhinoceros, an animal Europeans had never seen. Albrecht Dürer, hearing of its arrival, produced a woodcut showing the beast armored in thick plates and armed with a horn so deadly it rips open an elephant's belly. His broadsheet sold widely, feeding northern curiosity for exotic marvels that few would ever witness in life. By 1500, Germany's own Hartmann Schedel printed the Liber Chronicarum, a world history illustrated with German towns and castles. For the first time, Germans eagerly studied their own past, praising ancient tribes, royal dynasties, and the wealth of their cities, while the present, torn by princely feuds, offered little to celebrate. That very year, Nuremberg's craftsmen installed a magnificent astronomical clock in the Church of Our Lady. At noon, mechanical electors emerged to pay homage to their towering emperor, an ironical display of what Germany lacked, a strong central ruler. Maximilian I dreamed of restoring imperial glory, but his reality was debt and internecine strife. He purchased hundreds of Nuremberg-made cannons, founding a centralized armory, yet still lost Italy to the French, and with it the era of knightly cavalry gave way to professional infantry armed with firearms. Wars became mathematical problems of trajectory and gunpowder. Soldiers roamed Europe as mercenaries, loyal only to their pay, demanding double wages for front-line service. Maximilian I dreamed of restoring imperial glory, but his reality was debt and internecine strife. He purchased hundreds of Nuremberg-made cannons, founding a centralized armory, yet still lost Italy to the French, and with it, the era of knightly cavalry gave way to professional infantry armed with firearms. Wars became mathematical problems of trajectory and gunpowder. Soldiers roamed Europe as mercenaries, loyal only to their pay, demanding double wages for front-line service. Jakob Fugger of Augsburg amassed a fortune of some 2 million guilders, surpassing even the wealth of kings. He lent hundreds of thousands to Charles of Spain in 1519, enabling Charles to bribe the prince-electors and secure his own election as emperor. And in doing so, Fugger ensured greater profit and influence for himself and his family. In Augsburg's grand guild halls, the merchant patriciate, Fugger, Welser, Baumgärtner, Hochstädter, danced at lavish banquets. These families held mining rights across Europe, operating vast copper and silver works that employed tens of thousands. Like modern industrialists, they managed sprawling economic empires dedicated to growing their capital, paying low wages, and commanding high prices, the first capitalists in Germany. Albrecht Dürer warned these merchants in his art, "Remember the end of the world." Quoting Revelation, he reminded them that Babylon's fall would doom the merchants of the earth, whose riches, gold, silver, pearls, even the bodies and souls of men, would vanish in an hour. In an era obsessed with judgment, even the powerful feared that their wealth could not buy salvation. Across Germany, churches installed ornate chests where sinners deposited coin for indulgences, certificates from Rome promising relief from purgatory for themselves and their dead. Pre-printed forms and franchised agents made indulgences widely available. Pay, confess, receive the papal seal, and cleanup was complete. This lucrative trade enriched bishops and popes, who now owned 1/3 of all German lands. Yet it also bred deep resentment as clergy traded absolution like any other commodity. Priests in Danzig wore brocade imported from the Orient. Bishops kept mistresses and children. Erotic frescoes decorated the baths of Regensburg's bishop's palace. The church's spiritual mission was overshadowed by its political intrigues and display of opulence. Outrage swelled among reform-minded elites. Erasmus railed against papal corruption. Dürer depicted its follies, and pastors decried a clergy more interested in wealth than the gospel. In 1521, the rupture finally came. The monk who had sparked the crisis, Martin Luther, went into hiding at Wartburg Castle after being excommunicated and outlawed by Pope and Emperor alike. While rumors swirled that he had been killed, Luther spent his exile translating the Bible into German, resolving to make Scripture accessible in the mother tongue. "I have fought," he later wrote, "to have Moses speak such good German that no one would suspect he was a Jew." 10 pages a day on Erasmus's Greek text, he crafted a vernacular Bible that would become the people's book. All of it had begun 4 years earlier in Wittenberg. There, on the castle church door, Luther's 95 theses against indulgences ignited a pamphlet war. Though he intended only academic debate, printers scattered his theses across Europe. Luther denied the Pope's supremacy over Scripture and insisted that the Bible alone held divine authority. Cardinal Cajetan demanded his recantation, but Luther refused. Excommunicated in 1521, he emerged from hiding to lead a movement that split Western Christendom and reshaped Europe's political, religious, and cultural landscape. Emperor Maximilian I dreamed of becoming pope, yet he could barely govern his own realms. True authority lay with the territorial princes, who carved out overlapping fiefs and ruled them as nearly independent states. Nuremberg, Pirkheimer's home, sat at a vital crossroads of trade between Italy and Sweden, France and Bohemia, and grew rich as emperors sank ever deeper into debt to its merchants. Once an outright imperial domain, Nuremberg had won autonomy and evolved into a semi-sovereign city of some 40,000 inhabitants. Among them lived Bartholomeus Viatis, whose fortune of over 2 million guilders made him perhaps Germany's wealthiest man. Thanks to imperial borrowing, Nuremberg's citizens enjoyed unparalleled trading privileges across the empire. In 1495, Willibald Pirkheimer returned to city gates laden with Greek grammars and Roman love poems. His father arranged a prestigious marriage and a seat on the city council, hoping to anchor him in civic life. Though Pirkheimer chafed at Nuremberg's provincial atmosphere, he accepted his role and joined a council of surprising reformers. Meanwhile, in Augsburg, councillors emerging from the town hall entered a bustling market square. Venetian spice merchants struck deals, noblewomen swept by in sleighs, and villagers and craftsmen all moved within a divinely ordained social order. Yet most imperial cities faced mounting costs of governance, diplomacy, and defense, and few patricians trusted scholars, except in Nuremberg, where Pirkheimer's cosmopolitan erudition brought prestige until he crossed the line by translating pagan texts. Resigning in protest, he turned fully to humanism, corresponding with Erasmus of Rotterdam, on true Christianity, a faith purified by returning to Scripture's original Greek and Hebrew sources. Inspired, German scholars re-examined the Bible as a clear human message and called themselves humanists. In the mid-15th century, Johannes Gutenberg's invention of movable metal type transformed Europe. By casting lead alloy letters removable from molds, he created the first mass-print books, faster, cheaper, and far more numerous than ever before. His famed 42-line Bible remains celebrated for its beauty. From Mainz, printing presses spread to every city. In Nuremberg, Anton Koberger ran 24 presses with 100 craftsmen, first producing religious works, then the flood of classical texts demanded by humanists. Alsace's Schlettstadt emerged as a hub of classical learning. Beatus Rhenanus donated 670 volumes to its library. In 1494, Johannes Reuchlin argued for Hebrew studies to access Jewish wisdom, while Johann Pfefferkorn called for Jewish books to be burned, an early clash of tolerance and dogma that foreshadowed larger Reformation conflicts. These new currents, scholarly, technological, and mercantile, unraveled the old church's monopoly on knowledge, empowered princes and merchants, and set Europe on the path to modernity. In 1625, Albrecht von Wallenstein emerged as the richest man in Bohemia after expropriating Protestant estates. He offered Emperor Ferdinand II a private army, arguing that Germany needed unified imperial leadership rather than reliance on Bavaria. Granted free rein, Wallenstein raised an enormous force, 24,000 men exempt from taxes, paid high wages, and welcomed from all walks of life, journeymen with their families, farm boys, Greek riders, Polish hussars, and Cossacks. He celebrated victory with his troops, promising them freedom and adventure, and they flocked to his banner for pay and prestige. Families, traders, servants, and camp followers created a mobile society that lived by looting, where only a quarter of the recruits survived the march of 30 kilometers a day through war-torn lands. By 1630, Wallenstein's campaigns had reconquered nearly all of Germany for the Catholic side, but the war's religious veneer had already begun to fade. The arrival of Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden that July shifted the balance. Landing on Usedom with 12,000 seasoned troops, the Swedish king, supported covertly by Catholic France, advanced south, his army's rapid-fire artillery and rigorous discipline routing imperial forces. Not all Protestants cheered when he charged steep fees and made alliances with Cardinal Richelieu, yet his victories forced Wallenstein and the emperor to reckon with a new northern threat. In November 1632, Gustavus Adolphus fell at Lutzen, mortally wounded while rallying his reserve. Though his death stabilized neither side, it underscored how far the conflict had strayed from its confessional origins. Wallenstein himself met a violent end in February 1634, assassinated by imperial officers under secret orders after suspected negotiations with the Swedes. His demise paved the way for the imperial Spanish victory at Nördlingen later that year, crushing Swedish hopes in southern Germany. Yet France's open entry into the war in 1635 prolonged the carnage, as professional mercenary armies roamed the countryside, looting, burning villages, and leaving vast regions devastated. 20 years of grinding conflict finally drew to a close with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. On May 15th in Munster, Spain recognized the independence of the United Provinces. 6 months later, in Munster, and Osnabrück. The Holy Roman Empire, France, Sweden, Denmark, and representatives of both Catholic and Protestant estates agreed that each state within Europe would henceforth be sovereign. Religious disputes would no longer justify war, and the balance of power would be maintained by mutual respect for territorial integrity. The Swiss Confederacy and the Dutch Republic secured their independence. Alsatian territories passed to France. Sweden gained parts of northern Germany. After nearly 3 decades of devastation, a new order arose from the ashes of war, laying the foundations of modern international relations. Spain retained the southern Netherlands and parts of Old Burgundy, while France gained several Lorraine bishoprics as reimbursement for war expenses. The emperor's authority was weakened. Though he remained Archduke of Austria, his influence barely extended beyond imperial borders. Meanwhile, the Hohenzollerns in Brandenburg, Prussia, quietly consolidated their scattered territories into a unified state, indifferent to imperial opinion. By 1648, the Holy Roman Empire comprised over 300 virtually sovereign territories, some scarcely larger than a handful of villages. Germany was irreversibly fragmented into powerful regional principalities. The religious map, too, was settled. The north returned to Protestant rule. The south and west remained largely Catholic, and Calvinism was recognized alongside Lutheranism, ending wars fought over creed. Vast tracts lay depopulated after decades of conflict. Princes invited settlers, offering land and tax exemptions to rebuild fields and towns. Mecklenburgers and Austrians migrated to Brandenburg, Palatines to Bavaria, Bohemian Protestants to Saxony. These population policies revived abandoned regions and became hallmarks of enlightened princely rule. In 1699, only fishermen's huts lined the Weser and Diemel rivers. 2 decades later, Landgrave Charles of Hesse had founded Karlshafen at their junction, linking the Rhine and Weser by canal. He imported 270 Huguenot refugees, 200 adults and 70 children, fleeing religious persecution in France, and the new town's stocking industry flourished. Wealth, however, could not be taxed at will. Medieval charters still guaranteed nobles and free cities like Goslar their privileges over taxes, justice, and defense. Princes wielded armies and over time forced these holdings into submission. Artisans, shoemakers, butchers, hatters clung to guild rights, but the guild system proved ill-suited to the new capitalist economy. Putting out merchants seized the opportunity. They supplied raw linen, wool, and cotton directly to rural households, loaning or selling looms, and then collecting finished cloth for export at handsome profits. These proto-industrial entrepreneurs employed thousands and laid the groundwork for modern manufacturing. 2 generations after Westphalia, Germany's fields were sown again and its towns rebuilt. The Baroque flowering illustrated this rebirth. At Weltenberg Abbey, candlelit mosaics and soaring vaults overwhelmed worshippers with ecclesiastical splendor. George Friedrich Handel's oratorio Messiah, celebrating Christ's passion and redemption, became the musical embodiment of personal faith and hope, restoring comfort to hearts scarred by war. French Baroque refinement inspired German princes to emulate Versailles on a smaller scale. The Margrave of Bayreuth built his garden palace as a secluded stage for court entertainments, complete with fountains, shell-blowing tritons, and princely pageants. Bayreuth's Margrave and his sister-in-law Wilhelmine cultivated art, theater, and roadways, embracing debt as the price of prestige. In Vienna, Prince Eugene of Savoy employed his veteran soldiers to build the Belvedere Palace, offering them work and creating a monument to Habsburg military glory. Eugene's triumphs over the Ottomans inspired the emperor's historian to proclaim, "German art and skill have won a glorious victory in the hearts of all." Prussia, too, embraced culture, though sparingly. "We are king, and we do what we want," declared Frederick William I, who sold his father's coronation robe and court treasures to pay off debts. He built Europe's most disciplined army, appointing only nobles as officers and recruiting peasants with free beer and bounty money, unwittingly binding them for life. His son, Crown Prince Frederick, preferred music and ideas to drills. At Rheinsberg, he composed flute sonatas and discussed the divine right of kings with erudite friends, arguing that rulers exist to secure freedom and welfare, not dominate subjects. This free-thinking prince absorbed Enlightenment ideals from French salons and Dutch pamphlets like Zedler's Universal Lexicon, which saw man as a God-made machine governed by natural laws. In 1740, Frederick ascended as King Frederick II. He immediately abolished torture, eased press censorship, and founded the Berlin Academy of Sciences. Welcoming all faiths, he declared, "All religions must be tolerated," and invited the poor, scholars, and clergy alike to benefit from state charity and intellectual life. Yet Frederick's tenderness concealed ambition. Within months, he launched a war against Austria, his first Silesian campaign, rejecting law and decorum in pursuit of glory. In 1740, Europe's most enlightened monarch proved, paradoxically, that the age of reason could thunder at the head of an army.